When it comes to eating enough for your athletic endeavors, it surprises so many people that undereating is still such a common issue that is prevalent in all levels of athletics, from the recreational exerciser up through the elite athlete. In this podcast episode, we're going to be taking a look at recent results from the Female Athlete Health Report, which was co-sponsored by Kyniska Advocacy and Project Red S. These organizations are doing really important work to ensure that we have sporting communities which foster safe environments and protection for women at their heart. On this podcast episode, I'm very pleased to welcome Kyniska Advocacy co-founders Mhairi Maclennan and Kate Seary. Not only are they both elite athletes, but they're very passionate about advocating for women in sport. Their mission is to advocate for equity in sport with a lens on female athletes, and to do this work through three principal pillars: to educate, advocate, and provide support for female athletes, no matter if you are a recreational athlete or you are competing at the elite level. So today on the podcast, we're going to be diving into what is Kyniska Advocacy, why did they form this incredible organization, some of their past work, and also their present work, specifically with the Female Athlete Health Report. If you are a woman who participates in athletics, whether it's training for your own enjoyment or competing on a high-level team or anything in between, this podcast is truly for you. Before we dive into that, I want to remind you to apply for Strength Nutrition Unlocked, especially if you are a female athlete over the age of 40 who really wants to learn how to work with your physiology instead of against it so that you can build strength, add muscle, and perform better. Then check out what we have to offer in this program. You're going to learn not only evidence-based principles, but get the support and community that you need to succeed. You can find out more and apply at stephgaudreau.com/apply. All right, without further ado, let's jump into this podcast episode with Mhairi Maclennan and Kate Seary of Kyniska Advocacy. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast this week. I am so incredibly excited to have these two women with me because they are really pioneers, quite frankly, in what they're doing. And it is so very important that we're having these conversations around women in sport, female health, and so much more we're going to dive into on this podcast today. So I'd like to give a great welcome to Kate Seary and Mhairi Maclennan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And we were talking off air that the reason I found out about you and what you do is because a colleague of mine, anybody who's listened to this podcast, my friend Jamie Scott, posted the female health survey report and some of the stuff that you're doing. And I saw that and I just thought, oh my gosh, this is, well, first of all, like brilliant that somebody is doing this, because we need to hear this stuff. And also, you know, when you're in this field, it's like, it's hard to be shocked by some of the things that you hear because you're in it. And then you see it, data, or you see the numbers, and it's just a wow moment. So when I read all of that, I thought I have to have you on the podcast and talk more about what you all are up to, not just in terms of like the female athlete health point of view, but also some of the other, the initiatives that you're taking. So thank you for being here. And I would love to ask you to kind of give us, before we dive in, because you do a lot of things. First of all, what really inspired you to create Kyniska and, really get involved in the advocacy work that you are doing?
Yeah, sure. So Kate and I are both runners. We're both athletes, and we'd heard of each other because running is really small, but we kind of got together when we did our first campaign, which was actually more around athlete safety and welfare. And we were looking to get lifetime bans implemented for coaches who were found guilty of sexual misconduct and abuse in UK athletics. And we loved working together. And for us, it very much felt like the start of something. And Kate had the brilliant idea to set up an organization, which we felt was filling a gap in the UK anyway, where the athlete voice wasn't particularly well represented at the levels of decision-making. We were frustrated with a sort of lack of progress. We're kind of taking into consideration women's sport, and both from a safety point of view, but also this work around female athlete health. So that's kind of what got us into it. I'm sure maybe Kate can elaborate on that though.
Yeah, 100%. Basically, we launched this campaign, and it did really well. And we realized that this work wasn't being done, and at least it wasn't being done by athletes, which is our USP. We're athletes for athletes. We're women in sport for women in sport, and that's kind of what we've decided that we need to stay true to. So yeah, we set up this organization. I rang up Mhairi and I was like, we need to do more. And we came up with a name, and and we launched. That was kind of it. There's people ask there must be more to it, but it's really not. It's two women athletes that realized there were issues and didn't want to sit back and just let issues carry on, but actually tackle them. So yeah, that's why we're here today.
Yeah, tackling it head on and kind of rolling right into it. And I guess that speaks a lot to who you are as people too, and not waiting until you have everything perfect to begin. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were just so eager to launch and start working and continue doing the work that we were doing. And I think for me anyway, I have experience of abuse in sport, and actually doing all of this has been an enormous healing process, and has been incredibly empowering. And actually sometimes being able to separate myself from Kyniska is really helpful. So doing and channeling a lot of my passion for making change into Kyniska rather than feeling like I'm alone in doing it has been amazing. And so working together with Kate on this journey is it's amazing. It's tiring, and I think Kate and I would both say that sometimes it feels like it's a little bit one step forward, two steps back, but we definitely think that action is better than these soft words, and thinking really carefully about language when actually sometimes it's action that's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. With this first policy change that you were able to get implemented in the UK, what were some of the things, I guess, that maybe not surprised you, but some of the maybe roadblocks that you encountered? Was there any resistance that you encountered? Like, what are some of the challenges, I guess, inherent in sporting in the UK specifically that made this policy, or that kind of led to the evolution of this policy that you all worked on?
Yeah, so to go into slightly more detail about the policy, and a coach that was given a 5-year ban for sexual abuse was published, and we decided that was just not on. And so our campaign was all about introducing lifetime bans, which was successful. And I think the biggest roadblock we come across with this issue is people saying, oh, but we can't do that. No, it's not possible. And we've kind of been able to show, yeah, actually it is possible, and safeguarding our athletes is possible. And that comes across in pretty much every topic that we campaign on. Oh, it's not possible. Oh, that's too ambitious. And it's really not, because if you get the right people behind it and you get the athlete voice behind it, you can change anything. Which I think is a big light bulb moment for people. And I think why Kyniska's become really successful is because athletes are starting to realize that their voice is powerful for the first time. And that's a blockage that I think we come across all the time.
And I think also in the UK, what's difficult is we have obviously the UK, but then we have 4 different nations, and each of the nations are able to manage sport independently. So quite often when we go to like a UK athletics or a British rowing, for example, the argument is, oh, well, actually sport is devolved, and so that's going to be complicated to implement. But again, we always can kind of go back to that case study that we have with UK athletics and show that it's not. It is complicated, but that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And so this is, yes, it's a reactive measure, and no, it's not. Lifetime bans, for example, are not the key to solving abuse in sport, but removing athletes from immediate harm was and is and continues to be the priority.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. With that, as you're going out and having conversations with legislators or MPs, have you found that there's what has their response been, I guess, to all of this? You mentioned you've run into people who are like, that's just not possible. Is that is that phrase being repeated across the board? Is it coming more from MPs and legislators or coaches themselves or the athletes? Is it everybody?
I'd say it's across the board. I think everyone kind of responds in the same way to abuse in sport. They think it's terrible. But it's actually getting to the root causes of abuse where people start to think, oh no, I don't know about that. Oh, I don't know how we can do that. And the issue we come across with coaches is just a lack of support from their governing body. And so they're not informed about safeguarding and welfare. And so when they're questioned on it, it becomes defensive. So we think there's been a real failure of government bodies that are supposed to support coaches here, because they just haven't given the support they need to then allow coaches to do what they need to do, and that is kind of develop and support our athletes, and that support has just been non-existent basically.
And I think to echo what Kate is saying, the passion is there. The coaches believe in the importance of safeguarding and of fostering a really healthy environment for their athletes to prosper in. But when you ask them, okay, so how do you implement that in your day-to-day coaching? They don't have the answers, or their answer is, oh, I see my role as ensuring that athletes have a healthy, long life in the sport. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I totally agree that that's your role, but how do you make that happen? And I think there's that missing piece in the education courses that are coming from national governing bodies, where coaches are totally being sold on the ideology, but the practice and putting those into actions is missing.
Yeah, I'd imagine too, it's like, for example, here in the US, I'm a member of USA Weightlifting in terms of coaching and certification. And we just recently had to go through a safe sport certification. And, I think that was a great step. And at the same time, you sort of go through the education, you think about, okay, what are the responsibilities that we have? What counts as something that should be reported? How do we know and distinguish those sorts of things? What is okay? What is not okay? And then you think about, well, if something were to happen and you were to take that next proactive step in trying to protect that athlete or trying to report this thing, what would the next step be? And would you run into any resistance? And I think that's kind of, from my side of things is, well, what is the next step beyond that? And what is the, what is the, I'm just lost my word here, but when somebody goes to actually follow through, are they going to meet resistance, or is there a clear channel to the next step?
Yeah, that's a huge piece that I guess we're trying to fill a little bit of a gap in. So we, another part of what we do is we have a kind of support service for athletes. So we handhold athletes through that reporting process. So when they do decide to come forward, we can help kind of manage expectations of the deadlines, of timelines, the different steps that they have to go through, what are expectations. And then I guess when it also necessarily doesn't go well, or if they have already tried to go through the process and they've not got the results that they've wanted, or they don't feel that their complaint has been dealt with appropriately, we have a legal team that we work with that can provide legal advice. We have an emotional support volunteer that helps in that regard. And I think, I think we're doing quite a good job now of fostering this belief that if you come forward, we'll listen to you, but we're not also offering support. So national governing bodies don't have mental health support in place. And Kate has a lot to say on this, so I will let her speak. But I think, that mental health support and general all-around holistic support of athletes when they do come forward is not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not consistent, and that is a huge issue. So the reporting system in each sport is completely different, which makes it really hard for us to support athletes because each system is different. But it also means that depending on what sport you choose to do or what sport you fall in love with depends on how safe you're going to be, because the procedures and policies are completely different. Some sports take it really seriously and have been putting a lot of work into improving policies. Others are just, it's a mess, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So that makes it really difficult. And as Mhairi says, there's little support around the reporting system. Reporting is, as Mhairi will tell you, reporting abuse is one of the hardest things you might have to do in your life. And there's just a lack of communication. You don't know who your kind of point of contact is. And yeah, there's no mental health support around that. There's no media training. There's no, it's send off a report and, sit and wait and see what the next steps end up being, if there are any next steps at all. So we've actually called for an independent body to review all these cases, because at the moment it's done sport by sport. And, in the UK, sport is grassroots, mostly volunteers. And so if you're marking your own homework, we all know how that goes. So we've kind of said that we want an independent body that, these big cases get sent to, so that we know that there's consistency across all sports, and it's it's independent, so it's hopefully more transparent, more trustworthy, and then athletes will be in a better position and trust the kind of institutions around them more.
In the UK, if I'm correct, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's no equivalent of something like Title IX, where in the US, right, we just had the 50th anniversary of Title IX last year. I think some people would say, well, I mean, we have Title IX, look at all these, we've got 50 years of encouraging female participation in sport. And at the same time, has that really offered any protection here? I think we probably know the answer to that. But to what degree do you think that lack of support or formal legislation about something like a Title IX equivalent, would that help your cause? Would that have no change? Like, what's your thoughts on that? Is that something you'd like to see in place?
I mean, I don't know whether, the sports system is so different that a Title IX in the UK might not work, but we're, as an organization, we fight for policy change. We believe that having a really good structure that upholds values and gives people a place to turn is really important. However, it is nothing without culture change. And so, we'd like to talk about kind of like package deals when it comes to policies. Like one policy on its own, for instance, the lifetime ban, that roots out immediate threat. But that's nothing without coaching qualifications. That's nothing without education around female athlete health. That's nothing without education about just misogyny in itself. So it's as Mhairi says, this holistic view of women in sport needs to happen, and part of that, yes, is like really robust policies, but it's also building capability within coaches, and are like to complete the triangle is athlete voice. So we believe that athletes should be included in every single decision that's made, throughout the whole decision-making process. And if we get the Holy Trinity, which I've just coined, didn't call it that before, but now I do.
Heard it here first.
Those three things together, we'd hope would then push real change kind of from the grassroots all the way to the top of sport.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a place in the UK for legislation of some form, or even just more legislation. We don't have anything around that. We don't have anything that's sport specific. We recently had the positions of trust legislation that was passed. So it's quite specific, but it essentially closes the loophole so that it is now illegal for people who are in a position of trust, so coaches, for example, to have a relationship with athletes who are between the ages of 16 and 18. But it still means that people who are over the age of 18 are just not protected by that legislation. And I completely understand, like, in order to get that through, they had to make that the case. But there's a lot of work to do in terms of like policy action and legislation from a government intervention level. The government in the UK, again, because it is devolved, so you have Scottish government, Welsh government, and Westminster as well. So I think because there's these different moving parts, and also because sport has been independently operated, there has been a reluctance from governments to step in. But I think that in order for us to make real change, and for sports to have one unifying structure, it is necessary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on all of that. I'd like to shift if we can. And I think this was a really great intro into what you all do, why you're so passionate about it, and what your mission is with Kyniska. I'd love to shift into talking a little bit more about the Female Athlete Health Report, since again, this is kind of how I came across what y'all are doing. And this is something that I'm really passionate about talking about as well. And it is, I mean, I just can't even tell you how many conversations I have on the regular about this topic. So I would love to hear you just kind of give us maybe the broad overview of, or kind of the why, like, why did you partner on this Female Athlete Health Report? Why is this, and how does it fit into your overall mission? And why is this something that you are so passionate about educating about, and really also I love in the report is like giving recommendations for next steps, like why this particular issue?
So we actually we started working on female athlete health because one of our interns and kind of ambassadors was really passionate about this. She'd suffered with injury, she'd suffered with basically red S, and was like, this is a project that I really want to get my teeth into. And having promised that we'd listen to athletes, we were like, do you know what, absolutely. And the more we've dug into it, the more we think it's kind of understanding female athlete health is just pivotal to all the other work that we do, and just understanding female athletes in general, and just closing that knowledge gap between what we know about the male body and what we know about the female body, because we know that gap is wide. But we decided to put a survey out. We joined up with an organization called Project Red S, who really specializes specifically in female athlete health, and kind of with us, who are all about athlete voice, trying to combine the two. So we had 800 athletes, female athletes from all different sports, all different walks of life, fill out our survey, all about Red S, all about their eating habits, all about how they view themselves and their body. And we wanted it to be really qualitative. We really wanted to get that rich kind of dialogue from the survey, which I think we really managed to do, and got shocking but not surprising results. Mm-hmm. As I'm sure you read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on something really important here, and this weaves through the actual report itself, which is the intersection between things like energy intake, eating habits, and body image. And I think I said this before we hit record, is that there's a difference between, yes, there's a knowledge gap that needs to be closed in terms of education on how do we have appropriate intake for our activity, or appropriate food intake for our activity level. And then there's the complicating factor or thread that weaves through that, which is how that intersects with things like body image. Are you in a weight class sport? What have you heard from your coach potentially, or other, maybe even other athletes about, your body, what you should look like, the aesthetic? And do you have any thoughts on that, how these things are so interwoven?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inherent, right? So if we look at sport and like why it exists, it's always been about physical dominance and performing to the best of your capabilities, particularly in sports that have linear performances. So where you have to run the fastest, throw the farthest, jump the highest. And as athletes, your bodies and your performance are so closely interlinked and so closely correlated that the way if you're performing in a particular way, it's also going to make you perceive your body in a particular way, even if you're just doing it for participatory reasons, or you're in the gym. You can still, that narrative infiltrates all the way from elite right down to people who are literally just doing it because they want to lose a couple of pounds, or because they want to feel more confident in their body. And I think that when you're equating how your body looks so closely with your performance, the way you then perceive yourself then infiltrates, and that next step is so close. It's like it closes that gap, and it's trying to I guess, separate out what your body can do and what your body looks like. You know, those are two different things. They're different conversations. And if we're focusing on what our bodies can do as the goal, I guess, or the focus, rather than what they look like. I don't know if that was particularly coherent, but I basically think that because sport is so performance focused and success driven, we don't prioritize thinking holistically about eating, about body image, and they fall by the wayside. So we think that our bodies are machines because that's what we're told.
I think one of the most shocking statistics that we got out of the report was that 74% felt as though they don't look like an athlete. But like, then none of us look like, it's just nuts, because if 74% of us don't feel like athletes, but we're all athletes, then we must all look like athletes. It's not as if it's like 5% of people that are like, oh, I don't think I look like an athlete. 74%, like, that's pretty much all of us look at ourselves in the mirror who are training day in, day out, think I don't look like an athlete. And I mean, that's just like, it's symptoms of historical ways that we look at women's bodies, isn't it? It's smaller is better, smaller is faster. And that's just something that's actually, I think, getting worse. I think for a while it was getting better, and now we have social media, and now we're comparing ourselves constantly to other people. We don't just see times on a sheet, we see times on a sheet next to a picture of what they look like while they were doing it. And so it is just constantly being perpetuated that we don't look like what we think we need to or what we should do. But I hope that in some ways I try to take the stat as like a positive, or like try to be like, you're not alone. You're not the only person that thinks that, because I think sometimes that's what we do. We look in the mirror and we go, oh God, I'm the only person that doesn't look like an athlete in my training group. But actually everyone in that training group is doing the same thing and is probably looking at you going, God, I wish I looked like Mhairi. Do you know what I mean? Or like, oh, I wish I looked like my other training partner. And yet Mhairi's, well, I'm just using your name, actually about you, but like Mhairi's also going, oh God, I'm looking in the mirror, I look terrible, I don't look like an athlete. So it's like that, I'm trying, like looking at all these stats, like 91% are worried about how many calories they're eating. Like, if it's all of us, we're all in the same boat, we're all fighting this together. And I think that could be a really powerful way of looking at this, you know, as well as national governing bodies and that having to actually do something about it. But we're not alone in this, and I think that's powerful.
And I think some of the findings can speak to like particular things, I guess, in that, like, if 74% of us feel like we don't look like athletes, then what does an athlete look like? And what is that image that we're aspiring to? Is it that, you know, normal people who train a lot and are working out a lot are aspiring to be something that is actually completely unattainable and not real? In which case, does that thing even exist? And why is it being held up on a pedestal as, you know, the goal? And when it's 91% of us who are worrying about calories we're inputting, that just means there's a lack of education. That means that we don't know what we're supposed to be putting into our bodies at all. And we don't know what calories mean. And we don't know that actually we should be thinking less about calories and more about, you know, content and percentages of carbohydrates and protein that make up our diet, and fueling our body and thanking it for the work that we're asking it to do.
100%. Yeah. When you're talking about comparison, and I mean, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you. I'm, you know, was definitely one of those 3 and 4, right? That 75% or 74% of people when I was in my cycling days and racing bikes. And I, you know, of course, just like in running, we have like power to weight ratio, and this idea that, you know, the smaller you are, the faster you're going to go up hills, at least on a bike anyway. And how I was constantly comparing myself to the people that were on my team. You know, why weren't my legs smaller? Why wasn't my butt smaller? Like, if I could just make everything about me smaller, then I'd be better at that thing. And that was really isolating to have to sit there with that thought of, just not small enough, just not good enough. And to your point, I'm sure that there were other people, and there are other people who do all of these sports who are thinking the same exact thing, but yet I don't know, I venture that it could be just the vulnerability to start the conversation. And I think that's a beautiful part of what you're doing, is allowing for that, like, hey, like, why do we think that is? And let's just talk about it. And the pressure of, oh, I should look a specific way. So when you talk about that story, I'm like thinking about myself, and I can see like an exact photo. It was me and then everybody on my team. And I just, that at that time really stuck in my mind as, I just don't look like an athlete. So I appreciate you talking about that. And I think the other thing that you do really well is in that report, speaking to different levels of athleticism, because the most common thing I hear from my community is, oh, I train, I love working out, I love to do all these things, but I'm not an athlete. And I really appreciate how you were so inclusive in this survey, and like in the results in the report, about talking about all of those different, I guess, like levels of competition or levels of athleticism. Can you speak a little bit more to that? The recreational exerciser versus the elite athlete. Are there challenges really any different at the end of the day?
No, I don't think so. We kind of have this belief that there's an athlete in every body. If you move your body, you're an athlete. Like, you're doing a sport, whether it's you're competing in it, whether you're doing a 5K run, whether you're going to the gym, like, you're moving your body, you have those same pressures that an elite athlete has. Okay, it might not be to your hundreds of thousands of followers, or it might not be on the TV, but you feel those pressures in the same way as everyone else does. And we actually ran a campaign called Reclaiming the Athletic Aesthetic, because, if you put in to Instagram a hashtag of athlete or something like that, sportswoman, you're going to get a like really, really toned white woman. That's it. That's the aesthetic that we're told is the only one. And of course, there's lots of toned white women, but there's also lots of other body types, and they are all just as valid, and they are all athletes. And so we did a campaign that was using the hashtags athlete, sportswoman, athletic aesthetic, and just getting athletes of all shapes and sizes to use that hashtag. So now if you go onto that hashtag, you get a completely different view. Well, you get the correct view of what athletes look like, and that's like everything.
Yeah, I think that these insecurities and doubts that seep into they see that it's true for all of us. Like, I had a conversation with a woman at work who is a recreational runner, and she said to me, oh, it's funny talking to you because all of the things that you're saying are exactly the things that I think and feel. So actually, you're no different to me. And that's exactly true, and there's the same gap between, or the same perceived gap between what she does and what I do, and what I do and what an Olympian does. But I can guarantee that the Olympian feels the same way I do. And it's that we're human, and we're all operating in that same environment. Yes, there's going to be nuances at, a professional paid level, and at an international level, and at a club level, and at a participatory level, but the narrative is the same, because it's the narrative that belongs to the sport and exercise world.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your thoughts on that. And it's something I ask a lot of my guests, because we all talk about, at some degree, right? We're talking about athletes and athleticism and participation in sport, and like being active and moving our body. And there's different degrees of that. But I always ask this question because of that inherent pushback that I get from people, which is like, but I'm not an athlete. And I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of the things that you're talking about. What are the perceptions of who is an athlete and what do they look like? And so that if I don't fit that mold, then I'm automatically excluded. And at least from my perspective, and I don't know what you think, then that is having a tremendously detrimental knock-on effect in terms of, right, the low energy availability, the red S symptoms that people are experiencing. What was some of the surprising, or I guess like we said, shocking but not surprising data about red S itself that you want to touch on from the report?
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, like, shocking but not surprising. So about 50% of people had at least 2 symptoms of red S. And then I think, that's shocking in itself. And then, but almost 20% had 5 or more.
Wow.
And I think, we know that it's prevalent, but it's really prevalent. I don't know about you, Mhairi, but I don't know any female athlete who does an endurance sport or an aesthetic sport that has a 100% healthy relationship with their body or with food. And I don't think that's me over exaggerating. I think that's,
absolutely. And I think it's like, it's even, I know I have a friend who recently retired from like elite competitive running and was considered a healthy athlete, had studied the subject in depth, knew exactly how to feel their body, but that transition from being a competitive elite athlete into being a normal human, they found really, really hard, because actually all of a sudden and it's the same with me. Like, I can sit here and she could sit there saying, yeah, I'm really happy with my body as long as I'm running 70 miles a week, and I can eat whatever I want as long as I'm running 70 miles a week. But the second that you're not doing that, all of a sudden, actually the relationship with your body becomes really difficult. So it's incredibly prevalent because there's a lack of information, and because our bodies are so equated to our performances, but it's also because how we look is so contingent on this almost like excessive exercise. So when you're getting into a pattern of doing that, you're only comfortable with how your body looks when you're doing that, and when you're demanding such high levels of exercise from your body. And so then how much to put into your body and how much to feed it. But in the second that balance is, pressured or put into question, when you get injured, when you get ill, when you're stressed, if you go through a breakup, then all of a sudden things fall apart quite easily, and you realize how fragile that relationship that you have with your body and with eating is.
I think it's really interesting, like when you touched on just the lack of knowledge that athletes have, even though it's their full-time job for some people, but just around understanding periods. So we had lots of people fill out our survey that said they were on a hormonal contraception, but they also said that they were having a natural period, the two of which can't happen. And it's like that lack of understanding. So, there's people on hormonal contraception who are like, oh no, I'm great because I have a period, I have a natural period, that means that I don't have red S. Well, actually, that's just not true. So it's kind of like small little bits of information like that. But also what we found in the survey was that people with more symptoms of red S said that they had higher knowledge about red S and female athlete health. So I guess we've kind of concluded 2 things from that. Either people think they're informed, but they're not, or they're getting the information they need once they're unwell. So what we've been really calling for is just like, basically as soon as you're entering a sport, that national governing body is like, here you go, here's the information you need. Right. Like this is about your body. So it's really hard to tackle, isn't it? Because maybe it's good that people with red S symptoms feel like they're getting the support they need now, but they should have had that 10 years ago. And I think that was 2 really interesting findings from the report.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it was 1992, correct me if I'm wrong, that female athlete triad was introduced as term in the literature. I was in like 7th or 8th grade and went through, like youth sport, high school sport in my, 20s and still today. And only in the last, I would say 5 years, even heard of the term red S. And even as an athlete, before I got into what I'm doing professionally, like nobody was like, hey, you better make sure you really eat enough. I mean, it was just like that basic level. I think there's another interesting compounding factor, especially for athletes over 40. And that's kind of my wheelhouse here, is like, if you do not have a period anymore, your menstrual cycle has stopped because you're now in menopause. That sometimes we use that as like one of the main catch-all, like, hey, if you've lost your cycle, like you better pay attention to this stuff too. And I've had several clients, students and people in my community who were like, I actually thought I was in menopause. And I went to my doctor, and my doctor said, actually, you are, you have red S. You're experiencing that amenorrhea. You're not in menopause yet.
Yeah.
And they were able to turn it around through, a lot of the things we know you need to do, one being eating more. But that's another thing I think people don't think about too, is what do you do if you're getting to that transition in your life where it's kind of normal for that to go missing.
I think it's interesting that you touched on, that you're not knowing about it and you work in the space and not understanding or not having heard of red S. And I think also just like perceptions have changed quite a lot, even in recent times. I remember being a teenager and reading a book by an incredibly famous and like world-renowned runner. And it says in that autobiography that they had amenorrhea, and that it was very normal for elite female athletes to suffer from that. So if you get it, then it doesn't matter, it's fine. And obviously, like, that's not entirely blaming this athlete, because they had also received misinformation, but it meant that when I was under fueling, when I lost my period, I thought, oh, great, now that means I'm elite. And I think, that, and I would ask questions like, do I look like a runner now? And my partner at the time was like, yeah, you look like a runner now. And it's just, it fuels this awful cycle. But you're right that, like, I think sometimes when teenagers start their periods late, then it can be, oh, well, they're just active. And then again, when people are, even starting, like, even just if they're in their 30s or mid 30s, they can think that they're starting menopause early, when actually it's because they're not fueling correctly. And it's that balance between, it's not just fueling correctly, it's also that kind of excess exercise versus fueling. And I think it's getting that balance right, because often when people are like, particularly when you get into a stage where maybe you're not well, and this is a symptom of poor mental health, perhaps, where you're excessively exercising and under fueling, you get into a bit of a cycle, and you can get into a really dark place unintentionally, because your body goes into overdrive and thinks you're in survival mode. So actually you end up producing endorphins and getting excited by the fact that you're hungry. And I think that's, there's not enough education about what happens then when you're in that rut, when you're in that pit, and how do you get out of it, and how can people help you get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the recommendations from the report that you would, you'd like to see going forward? Like, so now that we have this information, which again, I mean, to survey almost 800 people and have this survey and the data is incredible from an awareness point of view, but I really appreciate how you go that step further and you're like, well, here's what we think would help. What are some of those recommendations?
Yeah, so we tried to, all our recommendations are based on what people told us in the report that they wanted. So the first one is mandatory coaching, mandatory female athlete health, like training within all coaching qualifications. We want that to be like really comprehensive, but also consistent across sports. So that's a really key one, because we actually found that athletes that had coaches that they believed were not informed had 36% increase in red S symptoms. So like, it's super tied to what your coach is telling you, kind of like what's telling you to do. And that makes sense, right? Your coach is setting your training, your coach is kind of like who you listen to and learn from. So if they're not informed, then how on earth is that athlete going to be informed? So that's like number one. A toolkit for athletes. Like I said, like we want information early. We want athletes to come into a sport and have that information readily available for them. And having that like online in a really accessible place. Third one is as a support network. So in our survey, we asked how people want support about RED-S and female athlete health. And a lot of people said they want mentors, they want people to speak to, they want people that have gone through this themselves. And then number 4 is GP support. And this kind of ties to what Mhairi was just talking about lack of education, about kind of missing periods. Loads of our survey respondents said that they'd been to a GP about missing a period or missing multiple periods and then being told that it was normal for an athlete. So our 4th one is equipping our medical professionals with the information they need about RED-S, because you know it's still not out there. And I just think it's absolutely nuts that for years women have been going to their GP and then like the medical professionals and saying, I'm not having this thing that my body's supposed to do every month. It's supposed to tell me that everything's working. And you're going, yeah, no, it's normal. Like that just is quite bewildering to me, because we know that having a regular menstrual cycle is kind of your body's signal to be like, yeah, we're doing well, we're good. And to lose that and then be told, yeah, it's fine, is quite shocking.
And I think just to on the education piece, when we're saying that we need like GPs to have education and coaches to have education, harping back to what we said about the safeguarding stuff, it's not just equipping them with the knowledge, it's also how to talk to athletes about it, because it's all fine and well them having this information, but then how do you make that link and actually be able to engage your athletes in the conversation? I'm sure we've all been in lecture halls or classrooms where your teacher has probably had all the knowledge that they need to be able to teach the class, but it's been really poorly implemented. And so it's the same point, you know, not everybody is going to know intuitively how to disseminate that information, and it's giving really clear guidelines on how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I still appreciate everything that you are doing, what you were able to work on in this report, and you know, bringing the athlete voice to, you know, how can we start addressing this? I think is absolutely critical. What is next for Kyniska? What do you have in the pipeline? What are you excited about working on next? Like, where are things going?
We actually were just on a call with Pippa from Project RED-S, which is really
nice.
exciting. So I mean, our plans are to implement these recommendations. That's our plan. We're setting up meetings with all the sports councils, governing bodies to try and get this, actually make real change. I know Pippa's working on some toolkits. We're looking at setting up kind of the support network for athletes, and then lots more stuff on our abuse, stamping out abuse and sexual violence in sport work. Mhairi, if you want to keep talking about that.
Yeah, we have questions around the Female Athlete Health Network, or the Athlete Support Network. What that looks like and how that's going to kind of exist is still a work in progress. I think probably we need to do a bit of consultation with athletes of like, what do you want that to look like? Is it that you want a full-on comprehensive app that's like a hub for all of the information and has a forum and everything? Or is it that you want a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group or, you know, a WhatsApp group? You know, what does that look like for you, and how can our organizations, along with your national governing bodies, work together to create that? So yeah, there's work on that happening, and then just continuing, as Kate said, with our stamping out sexual violence kind of agenda, and working with national governing bodies, governments, and organizations to continue that mission. Basically, Steph, we just annoy people until they do what we say. That's basically what we do.
It takes persistence. I mean, I'm sure that what you've learned, like the traits that you have as athletes have helped you tremendously in terms of like your persistence, your like growth mindset, not giving up, like learning to overcome obstacles. Because like you said earlier in this conversation, when you do reach out or come up against people who are like, that's just not possible, you're like, well, actually, why? Like, let's find a way. And that's that that dogged persistence is, I'm sure, so necessary and such an asset to you here. I think what you're doing is incredible. I'm down to help spread the word, support, and that's why you're here in any way that I can. So, I hope that this is also inspiration for folks in other countries to take up a similar mantle, because sports and athleticism is worldwide. And I think what you're doing is an incredible role model to other people about what is possible. So thank you for all your hard work. And I really appreciate you being here on the podcast.
No,
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast episode with Kyniska Advocacy co-founders Kate Seary and Mhairi Maclennan. I hope that you took something positive away from this episode, whether it's some kind of special or unique talent that you have that you can lend to this cause, the cause of female athletes and equity in sport, or maybe it's the understanding and knowledge now that low energy availability is a thing and it can affect athletes at all levels of proficiency in sport, not just the most elite. So maybe you realized in this episode that low energy availability is something you could be dealing with. And now you're going to seek out the proper support channels in order to change that and turn it around. Make sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and also hit subscribe here on YouTube and ring the bell so that you get notifications about more podcasts when they become available. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And until next time, stay strong.